Okie dokie. So we did your PDP last week, and we discussed your goal to understand your FSP role and pass critical point 2. So with critical point 2, you're sharing a specific experience and story that describes how high fidelity team works and how it can be helpful to the family. So with you being new and stuff, I know that, a little bit of this is probably a little hard because you don't know the families very well to know some stories and stuff. And I think you've only attended like one meeting so far. So I figured we can do a little bit of a coach circuit around that to help with that. The purpose of providing this story is just to help the families to understand how the process itself can help the families as a whole. So it kind of gives them like a broad view of what our process is and how it helps with those prioritized needs with the meetings and checking in with them and everything. So before we begin, I want to check like your comfort level on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel you are at this point with sharing a specific story?
As of right now, I mean, 1 to 10. I don't know. Maybe like a 2 because I don't know it. I don't really know or have any personal experiences or stories.
Where would you like to be?
Like a 7 or an 8.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so just to kind of touch base with like why this critical point 2 is a little bit important to us. This critical point 2 could be used in all 4 phases of our process. It helps to show that understanding of the process and how it helps others with a similar situation. Because what we do is we always try to make sure that the stories that we use are similar to the families so that they can kind of picture it working for their families. And with this specific critical point, we usually do this one in the engagement phase. So it's that first meeting that you have with them, you're going to be explaining this to them. This also revolves around our theory of change. It shows how it works within our process through explaining the prioritized need and how we integrate the plans and build the natural supports, and lastly, build that self-efficacy. It's all explained kind of in that story. And we also focus on the principles of team-based, being individualized, collaboration, and persistence with this story as well. Any questions yet?
No.
Okay. So before we get started with the with modeling, like to show you how like something can be related, I want us to kind of think about a family that could be beneficial for us to maybe like focus this on, that you could be doing maybe your live with. I know before when we did one, you did your live with your husband. It could be the same. You could do it with your husband. It could be done with
Mary.
With a family member, not with Mary.
With Mary.
Yeah, you could do it with another office worker, like such as Mary Ann. Them, because they ultimately are providers, so they need to know our process as well. So you can always pull one of them aside one time and do it with them as well. So who do you think would be somebody that you would want to do a live video with?
Probably my husband again.
Your husband? Okay. So I want to maybe, I like to go ahead and set up our modeling and behavior rehearsal. Who do we want to maybe use as our modeling in this so that it kind of you can flow it a little bit? Because I know you started one case already with Mr. Timothy. I don't know if that one would be good, if you want to use somebody else.
Yeah, I can do that one.
Okay. And so the modeling, of course, it just helps you to kind of relate it to a family you've already been working with. And Timothy would be a good one, though. That way you could see it from the beginning.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have any questions before we begin?
I do not.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Timothy, his biggest need is, of course, truancy, right?
Yes.
So you're going to be mom, Amanda,
Sure.
that I talked with? Okay. And we'll discuss the truancy, which seems to be a big thing for here. So you will probably be able to use this story a lot with a lot of our families, because truancy seems to be building more and more here in the county.
It is.
So do you want me to go through the whole modeling and then stop and discuss in the end? Do you want to stop halfway through, like anytime you have questions?
Yeah, if I have questions, we can stop.
Okay. All right. So I want to discuss a family that we worked with before in the past that has some similar situations to you and Timothy's concerns, that was based around the referral I got. We did have a family who had a youth who was not attending school and ended up with truancy. And unfortunately, she did end up in an alternative school because of her truancy, which then continued there. So the grandmother who I met with, she explained to me that, that's one of her biggest needs and barriers is that truancy and just getting the youth to school, because, ultimately they want that youth to graduate and continue on with wanting to do the nursing degree and stuff like that. So what I did is I supported the grandma through this, got her prepared for the team meeting. Our youth support partner worked with the youth to find out what was those barriers to there being truancy and her not wanting to go to school. And that's when the youth told her her main reason for not attending was there was drama in the classroom, and that was overwhelming her and actually triggering her. So we got a team together, which included grandma, the youth, grandfather, the youth's friend, and juvenile probation, CYS, and mobile therapy. That was our team that we got together. So, and case management. So then what we did was we brainstormed different steps for the youth and the family that they could do in order to assist with that truancy. One action step that the grandmother had was to stand her ground, because the youth would really talk grandma into her staying home. So grandma, so if she missed the bus, she would just go back to bed, everything be fine. So grandma, her action step was standing her ground. If the youth missed the school bus, she would take her and drive her directly to school. If the youth is fighting her, she would still take her. The other action step that she had was that the youth's action step was if she got overwhelmed at school, she would go to the principal and just kind of calm down and get away from that area. So what she would do is she would call grandma, and grandma would be available to process her overwhelmness and triggers, to just kind of help her to calm down throughout the day. So those was the two action steps that grandma had. So what I did was I checked in with grandma to see how those action steps were doing. Every time I met, we would celebrate the successes of the action steps being met, as well as discuss the barriers as to why the action steps wasn't being met. With grandma, we did have to meet to discuss, how we could support her in the standing up and taking her to school every day. So we did meet a month later on that, because that was a barrier of hers. But after we met with that and we just kind of supported her through that, things started to get better and better. Within about 3 months, the youth started going consistently to school with like minimal class classes being missed. And she is actually in CTC in a nursing program now because she got her truancy handled. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you have any questions with the behavior rehearsal?
I don't.
No. Any maybe barriers to you completing a behavior rehearsal that I could help with?
Just the action steps parts
Okay.
and the whole plan, the individualized care plan that have the action steps, and that because I don't necessarily 100% understand the plan yet.
Okay. So
I mean, I've only seen a couple, and I mean they're all fairly new families, so it's not like they have
they're never going to be a large amount of
Yeah.
action steps. You always have between 2 to 3 at the most of action steps that you'll be just reviewing with the families and seeing if they're doing, because ultimately we want to do those baby steps with them.
Okay.
So we never want to do like a large amount of action steps, because ultimately like with this one, if they have a barrier in between, we don't want to go back and say, okay, we have a barrier, and everybody go, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? We want to keep everybody on that same page. So we just make them smaller steps, and once those steps are done, then we go to another ones.
Okay.
So the action steps, usually what we do is our action steps are always based around everybody. So there will always be action steps for like the parents and caregivers. In this one, it was grandma.
Okay.
And then there's always action steps for the youth, and there's also action steps for the natural supports and the system providers. We always try to like combine them in everything. So it's not necessarily just your checking in on it. So is like our mobile therapist. So is the case management, CYS, stuff like that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Anything else we could help with? And maybe what I can do is with this case, I can also show you the plan that was made, so that
Okay.
way you can see that as well and how it was completed.
Yeah. That way I'll be able to explain it just a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Not being here for so long, haven't really seen all of the action steps.
Yeah. This
taking
one here
place.
was actually transitioned out. This was our first case that we ever had, so they just transitioned out at the beginning of the year.
Oh, okay.
So do you feel comfortable to do the behavior rehearsal? Do you want to kind of review that stuff first and then us do a behavior rehearsal?
I mean, can I look over it a little bit?
You can.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe what we can touch base on, like either Thursday or this week, about.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Thursday morning.
Mm-hmm.